Yes, thank you very much for this introduction and also giving me this opportunity to speak. I have a small presentation, so I will keep my video off and I'll show that, okay? Yes, so can you all see this? I hope,
Yes, ma'am, we can say.
yeah? Okay,
Yes.
so shall I start? Okay.
Yes, yes.
Yes. So, as it has been already introduced, that I'll be talking about caste and education, basically how the caste inequalities and the stereotypes are being reproduced within education system from my own personal experience that that I have had within education system in Goa. So there are these four things that under which I have what do you say, I have distributed my whole lecture in these four subtitles. So first we'll see how university, taking the case study as such of university and looking at it how it is a place of privileges, or the privileged. Then how the differences that are there have been very much normalized within the academia, how humiliation is used as as a means to silence the voices, and this humiliation is usually very subtle and not very overt.
Kavita
Yes.
ma'am, sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
The slides are not visible. It's just gone.
Oh, slides are not visible, sorry.
Yeah,
Let me,
yeah, yeah. Can you just check it again?
okay. Window. Now is it visible?
Uh, yes, now it's fine.
Okay, so tell me if it is still visible. Okay, I'm putting making it as a slideshow.
Okay, okay.
Visible?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So I was saying that I have these four, subtitles under which I have distributed my lecture. First, looking at university as a place where only the privileged knowledge is valued and is a place for the privileged. When I say privileged, I talk more about the upper caste. Then how the differences within the society are normalized within the academics, within the academia, how humiliation is used to silence the voices of those who resist to the violences that they face, and this humiliation is usually in very subtle ways and not very overt. And finally we shall look at what are the ways in which we can resist these subtle violences that are there, and how what kind of reaction that you get when you resist. So looking at university as a site of privileged knowledge, so this is the first time, in 2018 that the university had actually implemented reservations with, like, from the time of its inception, that is 30 years. So at the interview, I had presented a topic, how to make learning inclusive by using autoethnography. Okay. So when I finished my lecture and I spoke about what is autoethnography, which in later I will also discuss, and why there is a need for making learning inclusive. So soon after I finished, my presentation at the interview, one of the experts over there asked me, like, "Is there caste discrimination in Goa?" Would it will be very easy for people in Goa to hide their caste, get over it, and they were even telling me that you have to come out of it now. It means my identity as a tribal, wherein I feel discriminated. So in a way telling me that I was responsible for my feelings of being discriminated against. So once I remove my tribal identity and keep aside and start seeing things, that means everything is fine, you know. So this made me think, what gave the expert and the others an impression that there is no caste discrimination in Goa, and in fact, we see these things not only when the people from outside Goa make these comments, but we also see that people within Goa, Goans, if I may use the term Goans, even we Goans have this, impression that there is no caste discrimination in Goa. Or we would say that there is no caste discrimination in Goa, like how it is there in other parts of India. So we immediately start comparing. So we will compare it with Maharashtra, we will compare it, say, with UP, we will compare it with some other states. And that's how we then start judging whether there is caste discrimination in Goa or no. So we have a certain bar that we set. Okay, if somebody, kills, say, Dalit or tribal, then, if there is some kind of a violence that they can see, when the violence is overt, then it becomes, they'll say, oh yes, yes, this is very wrong. But there are subtle ways in which caste discrimination in Goa still exists, and which is usually normalized, which is why, there is this impression that there is no caste discrimination in Goa. Now, these questions that were asked to me, at the interview, whether there is caste discrimination, you have to come out of it. It is not like how you see these things. So, first of all, making these kinds of statements, asking these kinds of questions, it made me think whether these kinds of remarks are made due to one's ignorance, or was it their insensitivity towards the whole issue of caste, which is more willful, consciously or unconsciously they are trying to maintain the boundaries of power. And here the people in power were the people on the panel who were interviewing me. So it was very hard for me to believe that people who are so well educated, well traveled, who must have traveled to the different parts of India, who teach sociology, who teach about caste, in India. So when these people make these kinds of remarks, when they ask these kinds of questions, whether there is caste discrimination or caste system existing in some part of India, it was very hard to believe to that. And especially when you know what is the whole loaded nature of the word caste and tribe in India. So also there is a difference when the question is asked to learn about certain thing, and when a question is asked to label someone or as a person. So as a person who's on the receiving ends of these questions, like I was at the end of receiving these questions were being asked to me. So I felt they were these questions that they were asking to confirm the already held belief, the belief that they had, that there is no caste discrimination in Goa. And when I say that there is caste discrimination in Goa, they would say, no, you have to see things living aside your tribal identity, and that's when things would get normal. Now, how this normalization works within the academia. So when we joined, these questions and these kinds of comments continued coming from different sections at the university and even outside university, not just within. So they would ask, "Oh, you are a permanent faculty," and they were many people started messaging, "Oh, finally we have some Goans that are there at the Goa University." So some would ask, "Oh, konai influence laila, whose influence you've used." Did you get the job on merit? I was conducting interviews for a paper that I'm writing. So then this landlord asked me, like, "Oh, so you are there on merit?" So he wanted to find out whether I've got the job on reservations or no. And then they would say, "Oh, you are Favita, turn this side, let me see your face, who you are," in a very smiling way. They would do it. But they wouldn't do these things to the other, say younger colleagues, if that colleague would be from non-tribal background, or non-reserved category background. So at the interview they would also, they also ask, like, now that you're in such a position in the system, what would you do for your community? So that means people were not there, representing in the education system, so that's why we didn't do anything. Now you have come, now it is your responsibility, you do something for the community. So whether this position in the university, getting high salary and having an authority, some kind of position, in the society, would immune me from this whole virus of discriminatory practices in academia, or whether it does. So when I complained about these kinds of attitudes that were given, or these kinds of comments being made, and that it wouldn't be happening to the others, you can see that. So they would say that, oh, was it a male who asked you this question? Was it a female who asked you this question? So this gender discrimination aspect would come, and they would say, you should just turn back and tell them that you're not supposed to talk to a woman like this. So it would be like, it has nothing to do with my tribal identity. So they would also that, and this is something very common that every workplace you will hear. Maybe you're new, and newbies are always treated like this. They don't know, that because you're so young. Sometimes they cannot identify that you're a teacher, and that they will talk to you like this. So whether this kind of attitude, whether these kinds of questions, whether these kinds of comments would be made to a upper caste woman, you know so they would want to see these things as a matter which concerns gender, age, or your appearance. You don't look like 30 years old. But somewhere they just don't want to get into this whole question of, no, these comments are made to a particular section of the society, particular woman, and not the other woman. So why is it so? So the question of caste and tribe is something nobody would want to address to. So which is why even at the interview they would say that, you have to come out of it. That means if you remove your caste and tribe identity and start seeing things, then you'll feel that everything is fine. So normalization of such behaviors makes it very difficult to point out and say that these acts are actually not, a way of talking to someone, or these are acts of humiliation, these are acts of harassments, these are caste based statements that you're making. Why? Because they have been taken for granted and being normalized so much within the everyday life, that pointing it out and trying to prove that this is something wrong that is happening becomes very difficult. And it in fact confuses the victim, to identify and raise voice against such issues. Because when I started telling my own colleagues, forget about complaining, so they would say that, Arey, forget about these things are very normal, it keeps happening, you should not sit with these things, you just focus on your work. So then it makes me think that, oh, maybe I am overthinking about these things. So even if it is disturbing you, even if it is not, if you know that this is something not right, not correct, you know it makes you think that maybe you're overthinking. Maybe it happens to everyone, maybe I only took it in a wrong way. So normalizing of these kinds of attitudes and behaviors confuses the victim itself to identify these acts as acts of harassments and humiliation and fight against it. So very rarely, or you can say almost never, that it can be seen as a caste or tribe issue. So even if you complain, even if your complaint is heard, then they will see it as, you're talking to a woman, you should not talk like that, but you're talking to a tribal woman. And that is why you're talking like this. You would not talk to a upper caste Brahmin or a Chador woman like that. Okay, so this particular aspect of the issue nobody would want to address. So when there was a complaint filed, there was immediately gender sensitization program that was held for the non-teaching staff, you know. But these comments had come even from the teaching and senior faculties and the heads of the department in various sections. So since we were the first batch, who had come, who were most of us were first generation learners, we requested to have an induction program. So there was this 2 hour induction program that was organized, wherein different, we were told about the different departments and department heads, who you should, write to, the library, the, sexual harassment committee, then how to do, how to be a good teacher, the apart from the sexual harassment, then about ragging, and how, to start publishing and all that. But there was no mention of the SC/ST cell, the liaison officer, which was something that we had to know, because the challenges that we would have, the kind of difficulties that we would have, the way in which we would be treated, or the kind of welcome that we would get in this institute would be very much different as compared to others, because we all had come on reservations. And no matter how much liberal and progressive we say, we know the kind of attitude most of the people have when you say reserve category candidates, So the liaison officer and the SC/ST cell is something that is that helps in making, or it makes sure that the work environment is very safe for the people belonging to the SC/ST community. So here it was some kind of a willful ignorance of our presence over there, coming from this particular tribal and caste identities, which were completely wiped off. And it is our caste and tribal identities which make us very different from the rest of the others who have already been in the institute. So after we spent 8-9 months towards the end, then we were called by one of the heads of one of the departments, and he met all the 18 who were recruited that year, tried to know where you have published, whether you're writing, whether you're doing a PhD, so every one of us started telling our difficulties, which were very much different and which were not addressed during the induction period. So then the only answer that head gave was that you have to get adjusted to the system. And these were his words: those species who do not get adjusted to the ecosystem perish. So it was a way of telling us that it is your responsibility to adjust to the already existing dominant Brahminical system that is there, or else your careers are over. Because if you don't adjust, if you don't know how to write, if you don't know how to do research, then you will have a very difficult time. So now this pressure of publishing and doing PhDs is there on almost everyone. Okay? So it is there on the juniors, it is there even on the senior academicians. Now it is also not enough that you publish, it also matters where you publish, and this creates a lot of stress, anxiety, a lot of guilt and feeling of out of place, because there is so much of competition, and it creates this feeling of I am not good enough. Now this feeling of I am not good enough will be more among those who come from the reserve category as compared to those who come from the non-reserve category, because they are already considered to be meritorious, and those who come on reservations are considered to be coming without merit. So you have to first of all start proving your exist, that you deserve to be in that particular position. So you have that pressure. Then you have pressure of publishing papers. I'm not against publishing papers and doing PhDs. So So the stress, the fear, anxiety, aggression, shame, guilt, this feeling of I am not good enough will be more for the tribals and the scheduled caste who come on reservations. Even if you are a scheduled caste and scheduled tribe or OBC who have not taken reservations, will still have it, because whether you take reservations or whether you don't take reservations, you are judged by your caste. Okay, so these feelings that are there, that remain largely secret. So they will discuss about these things over a cup of coffee, or like call up on the phone, or will have very informal exchanges between friends, somewhere you meet on the corridor, again, this happened, that happened, but they are never made a part of, like public discussions. It will not be a keynote speech, or it will not be a part of journal publication. So it tells you even about the kind of research that you do. Now what I'm talking over here, everybody will be like, this is your personal experience, this is something social activists talk about. So we have a particular idea about what is research, how it is done. When you talk about your personal experiences, and when you try to give try to relate it to the the whole system or the whole culture, then that is hardly considered research. So research is objective. Now slowly subjectivity in research is being argued for. So how do you then silence the voices which are raised against all these kinds of issues that are faced within the education? So when I joined the department itself, I was again bombarded with these statements like there is no caste system in Goa. It is not like how it is there in the rest part of India. So it somewhere also makes you think that if there is no caste system, then there should be no reservations. So now that I am on reservation, is it some favor that the government and the university has done to me? These kinds of questions come, start popping up. Then there is constant monitoring and spying over how you teach, what references you use. They are small children, they will not understand Ambedkar and reggae, and that they don't favor videos and discussions over lecture method. You're new, and you should learn how to teach. So these are different comments that come, and these are comments and statements made to show that you are not deserving, you are not meritorious. You have to now start proving to us that you are deserving and meritorious by doing what? By following what we tell you. Follow our teaching methods, follow what we tell you. This is how, follow the system, get adjusted to the system, again normalizing it. Now this kind of demand for having a soft and easy syllabus is because of the kind of assessment that we have. Because merit is somewhere also or identified on the basis of how many marks you get. Okay, so how many marks you get also is based on how you are assessed. Okay, so then also there's this requirement, so that means there is also some kind of requirement for the transformation of knowledge practices within the university. So that means first you have to discontinue with the dominant mode of teaching and dominant mode of assessment, which is mostly closed book exams. Then you also need to discontinue with the the whole syllabus, the curriculum that is there, which is very much upper caste dominated. Now, why is it so? Because there is a new social group that has entered into the classroom and the teaching fields. But now these teaching fields and these classrooms have not adjusted themselves to the new who have entered. Earlier only upper caste would have access to education, but now you have people from different castes who come and learn. So accordingly you have to design the syllabus, accordingly you have to design your assessment, accordingly you have to design your pedagogy, you know. So it is, but it is left upon this new social group that comes to get adjusted to the system. So students have to get adjusted to the way the classroom functions, even the teacher has to get adjusted to the way he or she is supposed to be in the classroom, you know. So one of the methods that could be used, to bring about a slight change in the whole classroom setting, because that is one space that can be made much safer for start, like for the starting you start with the class, make it much safer. So autoethnography, is a research method that uses personal experience in order to understand and critique the cultural experience that is there. So it may be a slow method of teaching and learning, but it is very much student centric. It gives you first hand information, new knowledge is created, and knowledge has to always be contextualized. If it is universal, then it becomes very difficult for everyone to relate to. So now that the men and women who were earlier excluded from the higher education system are now entering the higher education system, the syllabus that was designed, keeping in mind who are being taught. So earlier it was only the upper caste who were being taught. So syllabus would be designed in that way. But now that you have new learners that are coming from a different background, so doesn't that mean that you have to also design the syllabus differently? Also change a little bit the way of teaching. So those who were earlier considered to be unteachable are now not, teaching, and there are even new who are learning, so which is why the classroom dynamics has to change. But the system has been reproducing all the inequalities. Why? Because the syllabus is the same how it was there earlier, which is very much upper caste centric. The references that you will find, the writings that are included, or the way the topics are designed, they are designed in such a way that it doesn't include all the voices that talk about that particular topic. Like I myself learned about Ambedkar when I started teaching about Ambedkar here at the university. We never had Ambedkar's contribution to sociology, but now all of a sudden there one subtopic, Ambedkar's contribution to sociology. I never learned, so I have to first learn and then teach the students. So even when you're teaching about caste, you have only certain perspectives that are included, certain references that are included. Now, however, there cannot be a universal good syllabus, because each syllabus and the method of learning has to be adapted to the local needs. But whose local needs is it adapting to? You know, so similarly, there is no universal good teacher. So that means if the syllabus which is socially biased and is being taught by a tribal woman, then she would find, or she or he would find, that it is very different. They're not able to relate to it. Like if I am teaching about tribes in Goa, then I will find a lot of things that I cannot relate to, because these things are not about Goan tribals. These are about Indian tribals or Australian tribals. you know so the way the tribal or Bahujan analyzes the world, it is very different from how the upper caste would do. And these analysis have to be included within the education system, which doesn't happen because of the constant reproduction. What makes it difficult to use such pedagogic methods within the classroom is the upper caste curricula, which is passed on from generation to generation. So, what were the other more disturbing? I'll finish in another 5-7 minutes. Okay. So, what were the other events that started happening? So, I was told that there was a complaint. So there was immediate action taken against that complaint, and then they said that, see, we're not doing everything formally, it is, think that this is like a favor that is being done to you. So I was quite happy, because first year and the complaint, it scares you, but then I learned, then I realized that I never saw the complaint, so then I asked for the complaint. There was no formal noting about the complaint. The complaint was dealt informally. The action was, taken informally. And all the accusations were considered to be true, without giving me an opportunity to say anything about these accusations that were made against me. So this creates a lot of doubts, suspicion, in the minds of students, the teacher, the other colleagues, and then this complaint was then constantly used to humiliate me. See, don't do this. Then again, students will complain. These students had complained last time, so you be careful. See, you show me what you're teaching. You show me how you're giving marks. You show me this. You show me that. And it was also used as a reason to extend my probation. So I was initially told that all the students have complained, and we don't know what to do. And then I later found out that it was only two students who had complained. So I was also told these things, that whenever seniors tell you something, it is always for your good and taken in a positive way. Otherwise, you see, like these students complain, and you're a good activist, but now you have to become a good teacher. So, and recently, a girl student had sent me these text over WhatsApp, WhatsApp text, that she hates Mahars, and we don't take lower caste on our doors. I'm allergic to Mahar sheets like you. Admit it because of your caste that you got the post. We Shardas and high caste don't take shits on our door. Now this is quite overt, but all that has been happening so far, about the complaint, the way the complaint was dealt, the way our progress in the university was being assessed by the different heads of the department, that was very subtle. That was a very subtle way in which they were trying to, ask us, whether we are working towards showing our, merit over here, whether we are working towards showing that we are deserving. That was very subtle. Here it is very direct and very overt. So then I filed a complaint before the liaison officer, the SC/ST cell, and the other authorities, but I have not got any reply from the liaison officer or the SC/ST cell or any other authorities till date. So I filed the complaint in November. Then I saw that there was this grievance committee that was constituted, and I filed a complaint before the grievance committee, where the chairperson is from outside university. So then after 2-3 months, I got response from them, and the case is still going on. But initially they said, right now they have told me that she is not a student of the university, no more a student of the university, and the university will think and then decide whether they are going to take up the case or no. So from December till now, I am still waiting whether to know whether they're going to take up the case or no. And then in between, this girl along with her family had come, told me about the teachers and other colleagues or senior faculties who had gone to her house to tell all these things, and how I was using her. But since it is done orally, then you cannot do anything about it until and unless you have something in writing. So again, going back to whether this place, this position, high salary gives you immunity, from being discriminated against. So it has always been very difficult for the people who belong to the marginalized communities to survive on the educational campuses, and even if they enter and they survive, it is not without any form of discrimination. So proving the existence of caste discrimination, the violence, harassment becomes very difficult. Okay, so even the victims sometimes try to deny the fact of existence of the discrimination that is related to caste. Sometimes they even take the blame on themselves. They'll say that no, that is right. Maybe I should start, teaching like this. Maybe I should, maybe I should include this part in this. maybe I should also write like this. Writing also papers, there's a particular language that you use. So we all are taught to internalize certain values, embody certain responses, and internalize some norms. So then when you have already internalized these things and when you do not follow them, it creates a feeling of shame, guilt, especially among the tribals and the Bahujans. You're not following, the trend that has been set. So fear becomes an integral part. Now, am I the only one who is facing these kinds of humiliations and discrimination? No, many are, but they have different ways in which they get adjusted to this, or they try to deal with these kinds of issues. So, those who raise their voices, who are not being tribal enough, not those who are not being Dalit enough, they are the ones who are shamed and humiliated. Some, those who enter into a servile relationship, wherein there is a cordial relationship, that okay, it's okay, I will do this, I will, so they are not humiliated. And those who struggle for self respect, have to also struggle for their life. There is constant fear, and there is also this relationship of domination and exploitation that is maintained by creating personal dependence. Now, if I had to, accept the favor that was being done to me by not following the procedure of handling a complaint, then I would always be, in debt, or I would always have this kind of, dependence over the people who are dealing with this complaint. So that means then it would always remain in my mind that, oh, they had done a favor to me, now I also have to listen to them, I also have to, adjust things with them. So now humiliation also is a way in which, once you claim that you're being humiliated, that's a way in which you can challenge the structures. Now, humiliation involves disrespecting, demeaning others, damaging other people's self respect, and causing them moral hurt and pain. So, what Palsekar says is that just saying that you're humiliating me is not enough. Humiliation as a claim is possible only when the person who is experiencing the shame says that this is something that is no longer acceptable by me. Now, along with that, you also have to tell them, or replace by saying that how else things have to be. If this is not the right way of talking to me or behaving with me, then what is the other way? So that's when humiliation as a claim is made possible. Okay. So finally, how do we resist it? So first of all, embracing our identities within the classrooms, and raising our voices through research, or creating platforms where you can share these kinds of caste and related issues, creating safe spaces is very important. And also acknowledging that there is inequality within education system will be the first step. Now that task is also very difficult because there's lots of shame and fear attached to it, including the tribal literature, or literature which is written by the marginalized within the curriculum. Using different ways of teaching, which creates critical minds, because what is thought is very important. Okay, and there is no model as such to teach caste discrimination. We have to take examples from gender, race, or examples from other parts of India, and tell them, because they have been written about, they have been talked about, but when it comes to Goa, there are hardly any, that you can give, because there's no written records, or there's no experiences that are shared. So bringing these kinds of voices, stories within the classroom is very important, and autoethnography is one of the ways in which you can do. Then organizing workshops. So adaptation and resistance is not always opposite strategies that we use. Either you adapt or you resist. But resisting is also a way of adapting to the system. That is, you say, you keep on resisting, and that is how you adapt to the particular situation. It's not only that you accept and adapt. These are some references. Thank you. Sorry, last part I just rushed.
Hello. Th-
Yes.
Thank you, ma'am, for your wonderful presentation and also giving lecture. So, listeners, so you can ask your question in the chat box, or you can directly ask to the ma'am.
So,
Hello.
yeah, yeah, there are, yeah, I am open to questions. I don't see any questions
Those
here.
who want to ask question, they can ask, please.
If nobody has a question, can I ask a question?
Yes.
Ma'am, one question
Yes,
is
sir.
there in chat box.
Yeah, what are the other native pedagogies you have used in the classroom apart from using literature from Adivasi communities? So I have used, discussion ways in wherein students were given a topic and then they had to first start talking about their own personal experiences and then, share with them or write it down and, then come and share. Uh, with even with regard, you can do this even when it comes to gender and caste, and then there's this huge outburst in the classroom whether these when these two groups of students started fighting about reservations and how they were there's no caste discrimination. Then the students one by one started sharing how they have been felt discriminated in their own classroom, and obviously the other side also was giving very strong arguments saying that no, we they would say that no, even because of reservation for 1 mark, I missed. So it, these kinds of discussions you get to hear when you give some kind of exercise, apart from not just using the literature but also allowing the students to share their experiences. Otherwise what happens is, that they say that this is your personal thing, you keep it outside, but when you bring it in the classroom and when you create a discussion around it, along with using the theories and all that, then that becomes much more relatable to them. Do you feel being a social activist can affect academic work in any way? I am I myself don't see myself as a social activist, but so I don't know whether it really affects the academic work. I don't. My question is always, how do you differentiate between social activism and academic work? Because now what I am talking is, I am often told that that is social activism, but for me that is my academic work, because I know the different uh, you know ways in which the whole that is part of sociology of education. It can come under sociology of education, but whether that will be seen as academic work or no is something always a question mark, because I am often told that what I talk and the way I talk is more social activist, but it maybe it can affect, but we have teachers who do both the things together. How do the balance is maintained? I don't know.
Ramrai, you can ask a question. Ramrai?
There are
There,
more questions
yeah, there's
about the
what
NEP.
what is my view on national education policy? Um, National education policy. This is my opinion. Although I'll have to study more about the national education policy in terms of empowering the community, but whenever there are changes made in the policy, or whenever there is some decision being taken, I don't think so they ask the community. And first of all, the existing system is not very inclusive, and I don't feel the new education policy it makes any difference to the community and empowering it.
Okay. Ma'am, my question is that you have definitely spoken about what students and people belonging to these communities do about it. But I want to ask you what the government is doing. How what kind of laws that are existing? Do you think you need further more laws or some policy changes which can further safeguard the interest of the community? Or is the government doing anything recently?
We have already very good enough laws and rules that are there laid down by the constitution. But only thing is that you have to follow them. I'm not saying that they are whether we need to have more or no. I don't know, because what is there, that only is not being implemented and put into action. Because when you file a complaint, with the SC/ST, or the court, or in fact the court, the day that I had filed the complaint, that day the Supreme Court had passed a judgment saying that caste based humiliation has to be in the public, and if it is done behind closed doors, it will, I mean, I'm just saying it in my own words, then it is not caste based humiliation. So that means anybody come to your room and anybody can send you messages, and that is not considered as caste based discrimination. So when you file a complaint, then there are always, first of all, there's so much of delay, you know and whether the I think there is already a lot of thing in place, and you just have to put these things into action. Like, you deal with these things much faster, quicker, otherwise the cases are lying there. So I think we already have enough in the law books that can be used. The constant need to prove oneself has a toll on one's, yes, definitely, very much. It's a very stressful situation, and then still people would tell you that, oh, don't worry about these things, you just focus on your work. How do you think we can eradicate the deep rooted caste discrimination from the psyche of the people? That's a very difficult question that I cannot answer. I don't know how I can, and how you can take it out from the minds of the people.
Hello, good afternoon, ma'am.
Ma'am,
Yeah. One second. There is one second. Shreya, do you think
yes,
syllabus
yes.
require revamp? Would it be on par with central universities, as it may help to qualify national examinations? So the syllabus again here, if I understand, you're saying that should be designed in a way that is going to help you prove your merit by qualifying national examinations. So what I meant by designing the syllabus differently was that you start designing a syllabus that is more relevant and relatable to the students who are sitting in the classroom, who come from various backgrounds. Otherwise, when you see the syllabus, sorry, that is there, it is more towards the upper caste domination. It is very difficult for the people who come from discriminated and marginalized background to relate to it. So that is what I meant by bringing about a change in the syllabus. Yes.
Shreya, you were asking anything?
Yeah, good afternoon, ma'am.
Yes, good afternoon.
Ma'am, I wanted to ask, I want to touch upon the topic that, for an example, when you talk about tribal, do you include the people who are from upper caste, but at the same time, they are from the tribal background? And when I say that, I mean, there are a lot of places in Uttarakhand and, in the northeastern region, the whole district and the whole area is declared as a scheduled tribe. It is considered as a whole, the whole community is considered as a tribe. But there exist so-called upper caste as well, we, from Brahmins to Kshatriyas and all those who come in that category. So what do you feel are those people who they have a reservation, at the same time they belong to the upper caste? Do they have the similar experiences, or do they or there is a difference? I mean, because there's a lack of infrastructure, lack of education and everything that is, that happens in any tribal society. So I want you to touch upon this. I mean, areas that are, the whole area, the whole district, the whole town is declared as a tribal community or a district. So what is the approach of people in that area, be a ST, SC, or a Brahmin, but they all come in the category of social tribe? Thank you.
Uh, if I've understood your question correctly, you're saying that there is an area that is declared as a tribal area which has upper caste as well. So what? So in Goa, first of all, there is no place that is identified as a scheduled tribe area or marked as a scheduled tribe, area in Goa, and there cannot be a person from a upper caste who can also belong to a tribal caste. Sorry, who can also belong to a tribal community. So the experiences of both these will be completely different, whether you are just five upper caste who are living in a tribal, in a, say, five upper caste families living in, say, 10, 15 Dalits there. The social status of the upper caste will definitely be the same how it would be in any other upper caste dominated area. So the experiences will definitely be different for the upper caste and the tribals. And when it is when that area is declared as a scheduled tribe area, the upper caste do not become scheduled tribes.
Yes, ma'am. But ma'am, I wanted to add that, I mean, I stay in a defense colony, and we have neighbors, and we have people around us who are Brahmin. For an example, a Joshi, and who enjoy that status of being an upper class Brahmin. At the same time, the jobs and all the reservation that we were talking about, that how when a reserve category get absorbed in an institution or a system, what the kind of things they face. And the same person, I mean, he is, and his whole town is declared as a tribal area, and he gets a reservation. So that's what I'm talking about. What about his, the seat he has got is because of the reservation. At the same time, he belongs to a different caste. So how do you deal with this? I mean, what kind of experience this person is going to have?
I don't know how it is, because that situation I have never seen. Because if he or she is coming from an upper caste background and taking the benefits of reservations on tribal seat, then that is completely wrong and illegal. So because even if that person takes reservations, and if the person declares, or like, people know that he comes from an upper caste, then he will still be treated as an upper caste.
Ma'am, there are some more questions.
Yeah.
Uh, One by Lakshmi Devi. What is your opinion on internal discrimination within tribal and Dalit communities?
There is this internal discrimination within the tribal and the Dalit communities because of the internalization of the dominant way of life. So, and first of all, there is very little share that is given to the tribals and the Dalits. So definitely there will be much more competition among the tribals and the Dalits to, get place for them in this little share that is there. And also, we would want respect, we would want to be respected and, accepted and liked, and, being like, make us part of everything. So how do we become, or how are we liked, how are we respected, how are we made a part of something, when we be like the others, or be like how you are expected to be? And what is this expected to be is like how a upper caste bees, right? So you start imitating their way of life, And when you imitate their way of life, then you also imitate their other practices of purity, impurity, and we have adopted this kind of lifestyle. So that what creates the internal discrimination within the tribal and Dalit communities. Have I answered all the questions? Am I making sense, but to you all, or you want some more?
Definitely, we'll appreciate some other questions or any closing comments that you have, ma'am.
So why don't you make some closing comments?
No, no.
Yes, one thing I would like to say is that when I was saying that you need to create some space and give some opportunities, I think starting the lecture series with the discussion on caste and education is, I felt was a way in which at least I was getting a space where I can talk about this, and to a different audience, including students and ex-students. Taking this initiative gives me a great joy. I hope all I wish you all the best, and I hope there are such more spaces created. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. The whole point, I think Ramanand had to leave because of some urgent reasons, the moderator for this lecture. But thank you, ma'am. The whole point of starting this lecture series was that, usually around this time, most of the students who are either jobless or even want to be in the academic spaces, but, they don't have the opportunity to be part of such discussions. So we thought of, uh, having this discussions and lectures so that we at least we try to get the people that they want to listen to, touch upon different topics. So that's why that's how Pinnacle has started, and I'm sure that your cooperation will be there, for
Sure,
future
sure.
lectures and discussion as well.
Yes, there's also this myth, this whole myth about that all the jobs are being taken by reserve category students or reserve category people. If you take up any institute or any department, you see there is equal representation, and then you'll get your answers. And somewhere this whole idea of merit has created, somewhere shame in us, that we don't want to take reservations, we don't want to be identified with the community. And then if there is no reservation, we have to understand that you will not get representation at all. So taking that risk of calling, being identified with the community, or being called from a reserve category, we have to take it if we want our community to be represented in different fields. So what do you feel about Sanskritization, the double discrimination? The double discrimination in terms of what?
Ma'am, the way we I mean, a lot of time we end up putting the blames on the upper caste and other communities, but what about within the section of within the scheduled tribes and scheduled caste, we are doing the same. We are trying to again do the double discrimination with our women and with other people who are a bit who are marginalized. I mean, they are subsection within the scheduled caste also. We have so many subsections. So how do you unite those section? I mean, okay, we can save and we can go against and we can retaliate against the whole upper caste and the whole group, but how do we solve the problem that is happening within? I mean, I have seen it personally, people who belong to a certain group and they are doing the same what is being done to them by the upper caste. They're doing the same, and I mean, it's like carrying the legacy forward and doing the same to the people in the same community in a lesser, who are a bit lesser on financial or in an educational way.
What do I feel about Sanskritization? If you ask about my feelings about Sanskritization, like my opinion about Sanskritization, it doesn't change your caste status or your caste location. A tribal will never become a Brahmin, no matter at what state you are. Uh, no Dalit will become upper caste, no OBC can become a Shardo or a Brahmin. So Sanskritization, at least from my perspective, doesn't work. And about double discrimination, I see double discrimination, happening. Within like women, you have upper caste women, you have tribal women, so there are different issues that we face. And then there are tribal women who are being discriminated by the upper caste men, the tribal men, the upper caste women. And then there is this class that comes into that is entering into caste. And that can be discussed at length some other time about caste and class, and how so as I had said earlier, it is more because of this whole imitation of the upper caste way of lives, and that is considered as the way of living your life. That is the way of being acknowledged and accepted. So that's why all this double discrimination or discrimination within the community, and then say this whole concept of purity and pollution also enters the tribal and the lower caste communities. No, Sanskritization is not enforcement of Sanskrit as the official language. Sanskritization was, given by M.N. Srinivas, wherein he said that it is a process wherein if the lower caste start imitating the ways of life of the upper caste, then they can rise up the caste hierarchy. So if I now, as a university teacher, start living like, or anybody start living like the upper caste, adapt their food style, adapt their dressing style, adapt their language or living style in total, then you can rise up the caste hierarchy. That is the process of Sanskritization which M.N. Srinivas gave. So I say that is not possible. No matter how much money you earn, the different ways or that you adapt of living, eating, dressing, you will still be identified on the basis of your caste and tribal identity.